Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. It's a Sunday evening. I've been back home for maybe 30 minutes. I did a little film room for our VIP subscribers, and now we're jumping on with Kevin Flaherty to break down KU's 23-17 loss to Illinois in Champaign. A disappointing game for KU, to say the least. Kevin, I know you watched that one at home. How
Yep.
was the broadcast crew? I'm always fascinated when we're non-con and get the new broadcast crews. I mean, I saw the one guy was Nostradamus on the pick six for
Yeah.
Jalon, but how was the broadcast crew generally for you guys watching at home?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think a lot of times these are guys that obviously aren't used to seeing Kansas football. Maybe
Mhm.
the biggest moment of levity came when Lance Leipold was kind of yelling at the official, and the two announcers were saying, "Oh man, you never see Lance go off like that." And it's kind of like, man, you guys really do not watch Kansas football if you think that that's something that we haven't seen before. The pass that you talked about, yeah, they basically called that. It was Kansas
Mhm.
was out there and he said, you're either going to see a screen pass or a draw right here, and sure enough, it wound up being a screen pass that the defense apparently also saw coming and went the wrong way. But for a group of people that or for a couple people that hadn't seen Kansas before, I'm assuming based on some of those comments, I did think that they did pretty well. They were really positive about Kansas. They described Kansas as a championship contender, I think, at multiple points, which will be a lot more difficult, as I'm sure we'll talk about after this episode. But it was overall a pretty positive broadcast from that standpoint. You were there. I'm interested to hear what the atmosphere was like, especially given that it's Kansas's first road game of the
Mhm.
year.
Yeah, look, it's so I was there, and my dad was there with me because he, was has spent a couple years growing up in Champaign as a kid. Dad went to Champaign, or Illinois, so he was sitting with an Illinois fan, and it is so funny hearing about how the Illinois fans approach this game that they have kind of the, I don't know if it's the right word, but like the beaten dog syndrome, where like throughout the game it sounds like a lot of them are like, oh well, we're gonna screw it up. Oh well, we're gonna screw it up, and the crowd, I thought, reflected that a little bit, where at times it got really loud. Like you can see on the pick six, right? The camera's shaking. It was so loud in there. Late in the game, it got really loud. But throughout different periods of the game, like it was loud, but it wasn't anything that I think, you're saying like that's one of the hardest atmospheres KU's played in under Lance Leipold. But it was kind of cool to get to see an old Big Ten stadium. And it's one of those that's got a lot of history, obviously, and they've done
Sure.
redone some parts of it. Um, but overall, it was a cool game day atmosphere around the stadium, getting to walk around like a lot of the tents, and they've got a lot of the tailgating right outside the stadium and some big parking lots. So it definitely had the classic college football kind of game day atmosphere, and the weather was perfect. It felt like fall. It was like high 60s during the day, a little bit of a breeze, a little bit of gusts of winds at some point, but it was a great day for football. I wish the product was better. I think generally we're still early in the year,
Sure.
and for both of these teams, I know we talked about it last week, right? You can't really learn a lot from Lindenwood. I think, talking to Jeremy Warner from the Illinois side, like they really didn't feel like they could learn a lot from the game against Eastern Illinois either.
Yeah.
And so this game, I think, told us a lot about Kansas. I think we probably just got to jump into it, Kevin, like with the
Yeah.
offense. I'll give you dealer's choice here. Do we want to start with the offense and maybe just like the game plan? Or do we want to jump in and talk Jalon Daniels and then talk game plan after?
I think we should probably talk Jalen, and the reason I say that is that you can come in with a game plan, and based on what Illinois had shown and all of those things, you can think that a game's going to go one way, and if a guy doesn't have it for one reason or another, your game plan can kind of go in the basket pretty quickly.
Yeah, it can. So I think first and foremost, like there's so many ways I feel like we can go with this, Kevin. So I think you look at this performance from Jalon Daniels, and obviously it's his worst overall game since probably his freshman year,
Sure.
right? Less than 5 yards per attempt, 3 interceptions is a career high. And yet you can look at aspects of it, and you saw him run the ball for the first time in over a year. That was a positive, that he is going to be a part of the run game, at least in this game. But he just looked off. And I think that was kind of the case for most of the game, where it just looked a little off. And I think accuracy wasn't
Yep.
there, right? We've talked before plenty of times, Kevin, about the arm talent that Jalon has when he is on, and you see the throws that he can make deep down the field, and his accuracy and the ability to put balls into tight windows. And that just wasn't there. I
Yeah.
wonder, after talking to Jalon post game, he mentioned that Illinois did some good job disguising stuff. Did that create some hesitancy? Even if it's not a full conversation in your head of like, oh, wait, what are they doing? Okay. Even if it's just a second of, wait, what's this? What's this coverage? Like, that can be the difference. And I think like that third interception to Quentin Skinner maybe is a good example of that, where if he pulls that trigger a little bit sooner, I don't know if that safety's got the ability to come over and make that play. So it's one of these games where it just felt like things compounded, and for Jalon just didn't look right. And I don't really know what to make of it, Kevin, because he was pretty accurate against Lindenwood, and
Yep.
opponent doesn't matter, right? Because you're
Sure.
talking about accuracy. Did you put the ball where it's supposed to go? And he did against Lindenwood, and he didn't in this game. And so I think it's really interesting to look at it through that way, because I don't know how concerned I should be about this.
Yeah, and I thought the arm didn't play up as much. And again, I'm right there with you on the opponent doesn't matter. You're talking about a certain throw, you put it to a certain spot to a certain guy. I think about the ball that he threw to Quentin Skinner against Lindenwood that was like the
Mm,
18-yard kind of stop that he threw from the opposite hash. And that thing was on a line. It was thrown with confidence. It got on Skinner up here, and so much of the stuff last night wound up being short, or
mm, mm,
it was a line drive, maybe when a little bit of touch would have been the better play. I agree with you 100% though on the the interception there near the end, where it was the safety kind of hawked it, and I felt like kind of maybe baited him a little bit into that thing. If he gets
mm,
rid of that ball earlier, it doesn't matter that he's bait. That's still a touchdown. I think
yeah.
because of when he got rid of it, when he first threw it, I'll be honest with you, with the way that it was intercepted, I thought, man, he didn't put any air under that thing. He left it short. When in all actuality, he should have peppered that thing in. It just should have come earlier. And so that to me shows a little bit of a lack of confidence. Maybe as much as anything, I know people were kind of speculating as internet doctors do about whether or not Jalon wasn't right from a physical standpoint. You talked to him after the game. He seemed fine. You said, and so I do think that maybe it was a little bit of a confidence thing. Maybe it was a little bit of, hey, this throw would work out if you release this at a different point, whether it's a little bit later, a little bit earlier. You think about a baseball pitcher, right? If you have a really good fastball and that day it's really riding well and everything else, you can throw that thing with a lot of confidence and get great results. A lot of times baseball managers will pull a guy when they're like, man, his fastball right now, it's about 2 miles an hour
Mm,
under what it usually is. Maybe he just doesn't quite have it today. Let's go ahead and pull him. And I'm not saying they should have pulled Jalon. What I'm
no,
saying
no,
is,
I know what you're saying.
yeah. What I'm saying is just that for whatever reason, one reason or another, it was basically like a pitcher who didn't have his stuff last night.
Yeah, and let's be real here. I thought about this as I just recorded my post game video, and then I was in the car ride home, and I was thinking about the amount of football Jalen's played. And all of a
Yep.
sudden, like, for the first time in 12 months, you're playing a full game when you're playing a team that in Illinois does a really good job of disguising coverages, right?
Sure.
And I don't know if Kansas's defense is one that is disguising a lot of coverages, let's just say in practice,
Yeah.
right? And so for your first game back, really in a year, because yeah, okay, Lindenwood, he threw the interceptions with Grimm, but that was really a miscommunication rather than a bad throw.
Yep.
And this is the first time you're in a full game, and I feel like it almost was like rust, where you're
Yeah.
trying to find that right. level and the right angle to throw the ball in. Like the first interception to Grimm, maybe a little bit more loft on that one, and the guy
Yeah.
can't jump up and make the play on it. And maybe you're talking about a big gain for Grimm. The third one, right? Maybe a little bit earlier. The one to Casey. I mean, that's just a tear. That's just you got to tip your hat to the Illinois player there, because that's Jared Casey's block he should have, and he doesn't. And then the
Yep.
Illinois guy breaks on the ball, and it's a pick six. Jalon can't do anything about that, right? From when he snaps the ball and sees it, it looks like it should, but then Casey just doesn't.
You're told to throw that thing if you have numbers, and they had
Exactly, and
numbers.
that's what it looked like, right?
Yeah.
It looked the right way when the
Yep.
ball snapped. So I think overall, like, look, this is a performance that I'm like, not I'm like, I'm a 5 out of 10 on my concern scale. I'm like, that wasn't very good. I don't know if I'm like panic button. I'm
Yeah.
not. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm not even close to that. It's just that was a bad game. Let's see how
Yeah.
he does next week, because theoretically, you flush it, you move on. It's a new game. You're building your confidence, you're building your level, and maybe he's able to do that next week.
I think too, he's being asked it, and this goes into the game plan aspect of it probably. And I don't know if we want to jump straight there, but I think he's being asked to throw some different concepts and things as well, or at least throw more of certain concepts than he threw in the past. And so maybe before, where he would have said, hey, Andy Kotelnicki's had me throw this route 350 times. I know exactly when to release it, where to put it, etc. You're throwing some stuff that maybe you aren't quite as comfortable with just because you haven't spent as much time throwing that. I think it was really interesting too, because I knew it and you knew it, and we talked about it. I feel like in the preseason and everything, and even back in the spring, I feel like we talked about it. The first time Kansas threw a screen pass on 3rd and long, you knew that fans were just kind of going to erupt a little bit. And overall, screen passes aren't a bad thing. People are going to say, "Oh my God, I hate them." It's literally just something to pull guys out of the box, right? When you've got a bunch of guys in the middle of the field, that can be tough to throw those routes sometimes when you've got a bunch of guys there. It can be tough to run the ball sometimes when you've got a bunch of guys there. And so a lot of times you're just trying to get guys to chase and move horizontally. It didn't necessarily work out. I think one of the areas that maybe I would have liked to see a little bit more was Kansas hammered Illinois a year ago in what I would call kind of that intermediate plus range, where you're talking like 10 to 20 yards downfield, where it's not quite a shot play. But I feel like, one, Jalon throws those really well. I think, two, Luke Grimm and LJ in particular, that those are routes that they're really good at and creating separation at. And so I think, seeing a little bit more of that, wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world. But I'm right there with you as far as panic mode for Jalon. I look at it now as guy had an off night. Like, let's see if he comes back with this stuff against UNLV.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And I think I'll use that point there, Kevin, to segue into the game plan topic, because it felt like to me it was kind of, we're going 20 plus yards down the field,
Yeah.
or we're going kind of 5 yards and under.
Yep.
It felt like there may be, throughout the course of the game, 5, 6 throws that were in that intermediate range, right? I think of a slant to LJ Arnold, that's about a 10-yard slant. There was a deep one to Skinner at one point, where he sat down, and I think there was another one. And then obviously there's the interception for
there was the
Grimm.
ball to LJ on the sidelines too. That was kind of like the stop that we saw to Skinner.
Yeah. And so it felt like there was maybe 5, 6 times out of the game. And then outside of that, it felt like home run ball, screen pass.
Yeah.
Screen pass, home run ball, screen pass, in terms of just like the passing distances on this. And I understand it. You want to push the defense back and then take advantage of the space and then have them come forward. And then you try and hit over the top. Like, I understand how you can explain that, but you're right, Kevin. Like last year in this game, you really did have success on those intermediate routes, right? Those routes where you're pushing back and then you sit, because Illinois plays man coverage. And so you want to have plays where you break so that if you're a good route runner, you can create separation that way. And it didn't feel like there was a ton of that. It was a lot of go or fade kind of concepts when it's going to come down to, can you place the ball in the right spot? And if your quarterback is not having its best game with his accuracy, having those types of plays a lot makes it a challenge. And so it felt like for me, like one of those where it's like, man, I can understand where you're coming from on this, but the players aren't really executing. And so maybe let's pivot. I don't know
Yeah.
if you agree or not, but that's kind of
Oh,
what I think
100%.
about it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, Grimes is due for some disappointment because Andy Kotelnicki was a great offensive coordinator, but even beyond that,
Mm,
Swain, I think we can both admit maybe Kotelnicki's best game. I would say West Virginia was probably his best game in
22,
terms of
yeah.
them just absolutely shocking West Virginia with the option to an extent that they just weren't expecting. But he also kind of batted 1,000 in that Illinois game last year. That was maybe peak Andy Kotelnicki. And so
Right.
you when you're looking at it, you're not thinking about, hey, what are the times when Andy Kotelnicki maybe struggled or the offense struggled. When they went all those drives against Oklahoma State
Yeah.
later in the game and didn't move the ball in game-winning situation. You're not thinking about that, right? You're saying the
Yeah.
previous guy tore this team up. Why aren't we
Yeah.
tearing this guy team up now?
Real quick, Kevin, like Andy Kotelnicki had some stinkers.
Yeah,
Let's not
yeah.
make any two ways about this, right?
But
Andy
red
Kotelnicki threw
zone
up some
against
stinkers.
Texas Tech, I get that you have a quarterback issue, or a quarterback substitution there, but they had 8 billion red zone
Yeah.
opportunities
Like,
against Texas Tech and didn't cut. Yeah, there were issues. I'm just saying that this is a game that's so fresh in the mind of people with Andy Kotelnicki because people were preparing for it this week, and so they were watching the game last year and saying, "Oh my gosh, Andy Kotelnicki, just
mhm.
out schemed these guys and tore them up." And I think that's one of the difficult parts about the comparison, where I thought there could have been multiple pivots here, and we can definitely get into this. One, Kansas was winning up front. They were. Devin Neal was running really well. Daniel Highshaw was running pretty well. There could have been a pivot where you just said, you know what, we're better than these guys. Let's line up and knock down some bowling pins. And I feel like Kansas probably would have won this game if they made that pivot and made it early enough. I know there was that point, their first drive in the fourth quarter, you hand the ball off to Devin Neal, he gets 7 yards, you take 2 shot plays on your next 2 plays, and you wind up punting.
Mhm.
It's 2nd and 3. You just ran for 7. You haven't thrown the ball well all game. That's a point where you can kind of pivot and say, you know what, let's start leaning on this running game a little bit to get us home. And I think the other
Yeah.
part was, maybe having the conversation with Jalon, and they may have, where you say to him, look, you're trying to win this game in one throw. You don't have to do that. If you manage this game, this is a game that we can win. And Jalon does well in those situations. You look at like the BYU game last year,
Mhm.
where Kansas didn't necessarily throw the ball as well, but Jalon helped them win that game with the running game and everything down the stretch. And they were able to pivot to the running game and hitting the angles with the running game. If they had done that, if they had had that conversation, said, look, I get that you want to hit that deep ball. I get that you want to hit this. It would be a huge momentum play or whatever. We're going to win this by taking our layups. And
Right.
I thought that was the pivot, that whether they had the conversation, whether they turned to the running game, I felt like the pivot was kind of to say, hey, we've got a layup here. Let's stop shooting threes. Let's take our layups and come out of here with a win.
Yeah, the heat checks, right? And so
Yeah.
I found this really interesting, Kevin, this graph that I've got. I found a really good website over the summer that does some of this like advanced analytics. And I'm still learning about it, right? So if fans know better, like please, by all means, like let me know if I'm being an idiot here. But really what this is saying is like expected points added, EPA, right? It's a measure of success. And you can see in the game when the interceptions happen.
Yep.
Pretty easy to see. And you see in the middle here where there's that big drop right before halftime.
Yep.
And that's where the pick six happens. But you can see how much KU is outperforming Illinois, right? You can see that gap between that little peak before it goes down and where Illinois was at. And you just see KU's defense, right? They had a struggle early on, right? With that field goal drive for Illinois that they did get lucky on, that wasn't a touchdown. But then from there, like the defense played well.
Yeah.
But then you can see the offense was building in the right direction right before halftime. And then things cratered because you throw a pick six. Obviously, like that's going to be a huge swing. But then you see early in the second half, right? Things are going really, really well until there's that interception. And then you see where the two kind of 3-and-outs happen at the end of the game before your final drive. So I think this is a good way of illustrating, right, that KU's offense was doing some good things in this game. It was not perfect. It certainly was not perfect. It left a lot to be desired, but this was not a 0 out of 10 offensive performance. There were some things that were going okay for KU. It was not the most explosive game we've ever seen from KU. This was not the most well executed game, but KU was doing enough to win. And you can see that the interceptions came at just terrible times.
Yeah.
Right. You think about one coming on your first drive of the game. That's not a great tone setter. And then you've got a pick six before halftime. And then you throw your third interception right as you're looking to go. And I think that would have been right as they're looking to take a 2-score lead. And so it just, the graph, I feel like, does a good job of showcasing, I think, the way the game was trending and how those interceptions really impacted. And look, KU is a team where it can't win games if you're turning the ball over 3 times and you're losing the turnover margin by 2. It's going to be so hard to win any football game against anybody in the Big 12, especially in a game like this when there are basically 9 possessions. You take out that final drive at the end of the first half where it's a run and that's it. And you take away the drive at the end, which is just Hail Marys. Like, there were 9 drives in this game, and you got to maximize those opportunities. You can't score 3 times on 9 drives. You're just not going to do much. And so for me, like, offensively, not good for KU. Broadly, I think there are some things KU did well. Like you mentioned, Kevin, the offensive line played really well. I thought the front 5 created some running lanes. I thought Devin Neal looked liable to go and take it to the house every time he touched the ball. Yep. Daniel Highshaw looked good. It's just the important part of passing the dang football and doing it effectively and efficiently that it felt like things just weren't right.
Well, and I think that's the other part of the Grimes discussion that everybody wants to have, because I think it is really easy to sit there and say, do the Sandra Bullock thing, run the dang ball or whatever, and just say that those were where all the issues occurred, and if only they called it different, it would have been 100% different. I think you look at some of the other things, not just the interceptions, but some of the other mistakes. You had the hold on the long Jalon run by Bryce Cabledew, that kind of brought that back. You had the reverse set up for Quentin Skinner, and you don't catch the pit. I mean, that thing was set up extremely well. And so at the end, you look at it and you say, oh my gosh, 327 yards. You talked about the screen pass. You make your block there when you have numbers. I'm not saying that would have gone to the house, but you have a fairly decent percentage of having a successful play there. And so I think as fans, people want to look at it all the time and say, oh my gosh, it was awful. Everything is awful. And I think when coaches look at the film and when they look at it with the players, they're going to say, hey, man, you make this block. This is a successful play. You hold on to this ball. This is a successful play.
Exactly.
You don't lunge at this guy and hold him. It's a successful play. And just like that, all of a sudden you're talking about 400 plus yards. You're talking about a win. And that's even with, them having the issues that they did. You don't turn the ball over. And we bring this game up, I feel like, all the time. But I feel like it's because it's such a great look into who Lance Leipold is. After they lost that game to TCU, when College Game Day was there and everything, everybody thought Lance Leipold was going to be moral victory. It's so great for us to be here. I mean, KU hadn't won 5 games in a row, since the Nixon administration. Not actually, but it feels that way. And what did he say at the press conference? He basically said, if we had played cleaner, we would have won this football game. And you look at this game that Kansas just lost, and if you're wondering what Lance Leipold's message was going to be to the players, it's probably going to be, look, we're not good enough to win a football game where we're not clean, where we make too many mistakes, and that was what happened.
And I love that. That's something that Devin Neal talked about too post-game, is the fact that he felt like this is the game that will light a fire, right? You have all this hype in the preseason, right? You're having a good camp. It was a clean camp for KU. you go into Lindenwood, you take care of them, and then you feel like, oh, we're going to Illinois, beat these guys last year, we got this. And this is one of those moments, I think you're right, that maybe for this team will be the moment that is okay, like here's a good example, Kevin, right? I think that this is probably good context too, right? Oklahoma State went to the Big 12 title game last year, right? I'm not, yeah, they did, right? And you know what else
Yeah.
happened? They lost to South Alabama.
They got crushed
They
by South
they
Alabama.
like, they looked awful. You know
Yep.
what happened? They got better and they figured it out. Like, yeah, KU can still go on and have a good season. What has to happen is they got to figure out the passing game. You
Yep.
can't turn the ball over, and you got to make sure that you play clean defense. And
Yep.
if they do that, they can still go accomplish the things that are in front of them. And if you want to say the season's over, I mean, fine, you can say that, but it's not accurate.
Yeah.
Right? As far as I'm right. Last time I checked, Kevin, they've not played a Big 12 game yet.
Yeah.
Now, are they going to go and win the Big 12 playing like they played yesterday? Heck no. But they've got time to improve. That's what Illinois, or that's what UNLV week's going to show. That's what West Virginia week is going to show. If they go and improve and week to week are able to take care of the football, play good defense, not mess up on special teams, they're going to be in a lot of games and they'll have the chance to win a lot of games. This team still has talent, and it's going to come down to, I think, finding the right concepts that work for everybody,
Yeah.
finding the right blend of attacking and also, I think, controlling the game, and just playing sound football. And so the season's not over. And I feel like that's just such an overreaction that I don't know. If you feel that way, fine. But I just kind of roll my eyes at it because it's way too overdramatic.
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I'm glad you brought up the Oklahoma State example, in that that was a team that kind of all along Gundy had praised for their maturity. Right? They lost 8 billion dudes to the transfer portal,
That's
and
so true.
Gundy was kind of like good riddance, because he felt like they had gotten rid of a lot. I don't want to call them bad actors necessarily, but he felt like the group that he had was a group that had the ability to kind of rally around. Kansas has 30 seniors. Like, this is the group that you want to have, where they can go into the locker room and say, look, like, we got to refocus this thing. If you have leadership on this team, this is
Mm-hmm.
going to be where it's going to show. And I think the kind of another interesting thing about it was, Oklahoma State kind of found Ollie Gordon. Kansas doesn't need to find Devin Neal or Daniel Highshaw. They know where they're at. And even beyond that, I think it helps your margin for error so much when you're better than people up front. And if you want to take one positive away from
Yep.
the Illinois game, it was that on both sides of the ball, Kansas's front was better than Illinois' was. I thought the defensive tackles were great. Hey, welcome back, Caleb Taylor. Cornell Wheeler was fantastic in that linebacking group. I think we all kind of wondered, I don't want to say how he was going to be because he had played before, but stepping into that Rich Miller kind of leadership role,
Mm-hmm.
getting guys aligned, pointing guys around, and then how's the play going to be with that? And my gosh, Swain, we talked about it in the preseason when we said, okay, which guy on the team that's not currently kind of a preseason All Big 12 guy has a chance to be that guy? I think we all circled Marvin Grant with about 5 exclamation points. And Marvin Grant was one of the best players on the football field yesterday.
Marvin played awesome. That was
Yeah,
really cool to see. Like, seeing a guy that's put in, it's cool to see when a guy is put in a role that is so, to me, like tailor made for his skill set,
sure.
and allowing him to go out there and play well. Like, for me, when I watched Marvin Grant's tape from Purdue when he first came to KU, I think the player we saw yesterday is the player I saw on tape. A
Yeah,
guy that has the ability to roam around, make plays, come off the edge, blitz, go cover in space a little bit too. Like, I just thought he really looked the part, and that was super encouraging. I think the front seven generally, Kevin, like, yeah, okay, Illinois is slow offensively, and they try to be physical. And Illinois' offense, if it played in the Big 12, would probably be bottom half.
yeah,
I think it'd be better than like Baylor, Cincinnati, like that type of team. But I think it'd be a bottom half, right? Franklin, incredible wide receiver. I thought Bryant looked pretty good. Altmaier would be a middle of the road quarterback in the Big 12.
yep,
But for KU's defense to show up physically against that Illinois offensive line and tackle Caden Fagan the way they did, the 6'3", 250 beast that is Caden Fagan. Like, that's all really encouraging, Kevin. And we talk about this defense improving year over year. Well, so here, I think this is a really good way to look at it, Kevin. So in 2022, KU like just showed that it can be competent defensively. Like,
Yeah.
it's going to give up game. There'll be games that give up a lot of points, but like they did a pretty good job of just not getting walked over every single drive of every single game. Last year, we saw the defense take a step forward on the defensive line. Austin
Yeah.
Booker, Gage Keys, Devin Phillips, Tommy Dunn, DJ Withers, those guys improved. And obviously Jeremy got better. This year, what you're seeing is those D tackles have now improved. They've taken another step. You've
Yep.
got Jeremy Robinson in his senior year. Dylan Woodkey, I thought, really showed up.
He did.
The defensive line, I think, looks good. Does it have the star Austin Booker player? No, probably not. But it's got some solid players along the front that can hold their own. And the evolution now has come at the linebacker position,
Yep.
where Marvin Grant has replaced Craig Young, right? Athletically, Craig probably like an A+, Marvin's probably a B+, I'd say.
Yeah.
But Marvin offers you that physicality of a linebacker that I think Craig Young always felt more like a safety. And then you look at someone like Cornell Wheeler, who's got some of that same feel as Rich Miller had for the game, but is just a way better athlete. And now KU is playing this look where it is really a 4-2 with then Marvin Grant playing as that kind of hybrid role. And just everyone's in positions where they can go and make plays and run to the ball, and there's athleticism.
Yep.
And that is such an encouraging part of this for KU's defense is that constant improvement. And now you look at it and you're like, the defensive line has the athletes KU looks for. Linebacker has the athletes KU looks for. And you see the secondary, and it's guys that you've seen at KU improve year over year and have done it. So I am very encouraged by this defense. I think there's still another level. I think UNLV is going to pose some questions for KU
Sure.
in that defense, and we'll see how they answer that. I'm not ready to say, hey, this defense is going to be really good or it's going to be as good as last year. What I'm saying is the pieces look like they have improved year over year, which leads me to believe that there is a chance that this defense can be good this year. It's going to be great. It's going to be like holding teams 10, 15 points every game, running 21 points every game. No, I'm not expecting that. But can this be better and more equipped to, I think, be more consistent this year? Yes.
You're seeing a lot more people at the ball, right? I mean, that
Yeah.
was something that 2 years ago, 2022, even if they got a guy on the ground, a lot of times it was one guy, like having to make a tackle in space, or it was a big play. Whereas now you think about the forced fumble, Marvin Grant hits a guy high, and then Cornell Wheeler's there to force the fumble. Then you have, Jeremy Robinson right there, ready to kind of hop on the ball as well. And so they're able to get to where they need to go. I like the discussion of Craig Young versus Marvin Grant, because I think Craig Young's athleticism allowed him to be invisible. And what I mean by that is you never looked at him and felt like this guy's out of place. He's out of position. He's getting burned, right? He kind of took a pipe that was pouring water, and you had like the guy put the slap stuff on there so it's not leaking anymore. Well, Marvin Grant just chops the damn pipe in half. Like he's got the instincts, and so he's a lot more playmaker at that spot. It's not that he's necessarily, hey, I'm going to cover a slot, and the slot's not going to burn us for 100 yards, so you're going to feel like I did my job. It's that Marvin's going to make tackles on the sideline. He's going to sack the quarterback when you send him on a blitz. He's going to give them a lot more of that playmaking aspect. And I feel like I brought this up already, but the defensive tackles, I mean, I don't know what Jim Panagos makes, but it should probably be more than whatever he's making right now in terms of where those guys came in and the way that they continue to grow and develop. DJ Warner, not a defensive tackle, but had Altmaier in his grasp, was that close to his first career sack. And so the defensive line's coming along pretty well, I think, Swain. Illinois, a team that, wanted to run the ball, has a 250-pound running back. They ran for 79 yards at 2.3 yards per carry. I think if you would have said that to us when we were meeting for media stuff last week, hey, Illinois is going to run for under 80 yards and their average 2.3 yards per carry. I think we would have had Kansas not just in a win, but in a blowout. I mean, I thought that they took care of business really well. And to your point, Illinois' system is so different than what you typically see in the Big 12. And so people are going to spread Kansas out more. They're going to do things where Kansas isn't allowed to get five guys at the ball the way that Illinois does, where it's more of a test of your manhood or whatever in terms of the physicality you play with. I really think that this is maybe a team that's a little bit better equipped in the Big 12 just because they run a lot
Yeah.
better. And I think they're going to be better up front than they have been in previous years as well.
Exactly. And can you play that physical if you play that physical level with the athletes KU looks to have in the Big
Yep.
12, that's a good recipe, right? Because not every Big 12 offensive line is going to be as physical as West Virginia, or not West Virginia's. I was thinking of West Virginia's offensive line that's not going to be as physical
Yeah.
as Illinois, right? I think like West
Yeah.
Virginia. I watched some of BYU. Oh my gosh, like
And
oof.
Baylor. Oh,
Baylor, oof. Iowa State, oof.
Cam Rising was out for most of that game, and so Baylor had the whole thing right there and just could not do anything offensively.
Exactly. So it's one of those things where for KU, you're looking at it and you're just like, okay, like they can do some things. Now, I think you look at this game and there's just some plays where you got to tip your hat to Illinois, I
Yeah.
think. Right? Like the catch where Franklin's got like Demarius McGee like pushed like this, or I guess
Yeah.
like this and goes like grabs like that. Like I don't know what you're supposed to do there. Like, I mean, like maybe Demarius get like a little closer, but like he's getting stiff armed on one hand, and then he's guys making a great play. And so, like some of those plays for the defensive backs, it's like, yeah, like you're playing a hard position and playing corner. You're going to give up some plays every once in a while. And I don't know if you can really blame them on that. So I think for KU, like positives for this game, Kevin, defense
Yep.
looked pretty good physically. Offensive line looked good. Devin Neal confirmed, still good at football. Maybe should have gotten more touches.
Yep.
Definitely should have gotten more touches, I think.
He and Daniel Highshaw had 21 combined, and with the way that Devin was running, Devin probably should have had at least that himself, if not even a couple more than that. But it is, and the other part of that too, Swain. Coaches love nothing more than to talk about complimentary football, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're in that game, your defense is playing like that. I think you start to feel like, okay, the defense is doing its job. We need to keep those guys fresh. How do you keep guys fresh? You run the ball and take a while too. And so the complementary football aspect was maybe just a little bit off as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious, Kevin, like what's your vibe right now on KU? Like, are you like, do you feel like this is a game where you are left with more questions than answers, more answers than questions? How do you feel just about KU as a team right now?
Yeah, I think you've got it's kind of funny. I think you've got more answers than questions, and it's kind of funny because people were getting on Grimes for not running the ball enough, and I kind of made the joke I think last night that if you want an offensive coordinator who wants to run the ball, like Jeff Grimes is the dude for you. Like if you talk to people at Baylor, you talk to people at BYU, I'm sure that, oh man, we threw the ball too much is not a complaint that Jeff Grimes heard a whole heck of a lot. And so my joke with that is just to say, if this winds up being a Jalon thing and it turns out, hey, Jalon's just rusty because he hasn't played in a while, it's going to take him a little while to become the Jalon Daniels that we all know and love. Jeff Grimes is kind of the OC that you want for that because he's not going to have any problem, I don't think, forcing the passing game to be there if it's not there. And so I think from that perspective, I'm maybe a little bit more positive than other people are, and that I feel like if it does become a team where, hey, this offense needs to be Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw carrying the ball 35 times a game, I feel like Jeff Grimes isn't the worst guy for that. I think that's something he would be very comfortable with. The defense, I think I'm really, high on, like you said, it's not that I think they're going to be a shutdown defense. It's not that I think they're going to be, but I do think that against certain teams, they're going to be really tough to move the ball on it. And I think even beyond that, there aren't a whole lot of teams on the schedule that you look at KU's defense and you just say, man, I do not like that matchup for that defense. Especially think about like back into like 2022 when we would talk about teams that would go up tempo, like Oklahoma and people like that, where you were like, you knew going in, oh my gosh, this is going to be a problem. There aren't a whole lot of teams offensively in the Big 12 that are on Kansas's schedule that I look at it and feel like, oh man, like I'm not in love with that against Kansas. The other thing is, look, we came into the season feeling like the biggest question mark was on the offensive line, based on comments, based on the fact that they still had position battles there, whereas pretty much the rest of the offense was set, right? And so I felt like that was a great step in the right direction. Jalon Daniels had time to throw. They protected well as running the ball. And so I do think that there are more positives than negatives. I think you want to see the leadership now in terms of how they come out against UNLV. And I think for right now, it's the sort of thing where I'm going to chalk up Jalon Daniels' performance to a bad night. Whereas if we're sitting here post West Virginia, Kansas has lost one of the next two, and Jalon has continued to look like that. I think that's maybe the point where you start to really have those questions and say, okay, where do things need to proceed?
Yeah. I think I agree, Kevin. I forgot someone asked me to answer this on the message board. So I'm sure you saw the Jeff Grimes discourse.
Sure.
I don't know if you can call it even discourse. So why did KU call the game the way they did? So if you go back and watch, Illinois has always been kind of a 3-4 that plays as kind of like a 5-1, 5-2 sometimes. Well, this game, Illinois switched between going from that 5-man front to then playing a 4-3, where then they were playing with 4 down linemen and 3 linebackers. And so basically they kept 7 guys in the box, especially at the start of a drive or on running downs. And if you're, I'm not a math expert, Kevin, as I think people have learned at this point. I'm not great at math, but KU runs a lot of 11 personnel.
Yeah.
Right. 1 tight end, 1 running back. If you have 1 tight end along the line of scrimmage, that's 6. If the other team has 7 in the box, that means you're outnumbered by 1. And if Illinois is going to play one-on-one coverage on the outside, because if they are playing 4-3 and you've got 11 personnel, that means you got 3 wide receivers out, which means they're going to have 3 guys covering 1 deep safety. So what are you going to do? You're going to try and attack, because that 1 deep safety has to cover, again, math here. How wide's the field? However wide the field is. So you're going to try and attack that. And so that's what KU tried to do, I think, on early downs, was to try and soften that box, get Illinois to play 2 high safeties, get them to transition playing cover 3 then, where maybe they got, the safety and then they've got 2 corners dropping deep. And then you can get to the outside zone stuff because those corners are moving back and they can't come set the so there are just certain things that I think early in that game Illinois showed, where then KU is saying, okay, well, if you're giving us this, let's try and exploit it. And then if your quarterback is having a bad game where he isn't super accurate and super crisp, it's hard to take advantage of that. So I think that, for me at least, when I was rewatching the game and some specific clips like that, to me looked like why KU was going to the game plan it was, because Illinois was really trying to load the box to make KU try and beat it deep and try and beat it with some of those concepts. And just KU couldn't. And it's a credit to the offensive line that even in some of those loaded box situations, they're still able to find ways to create creases. But I think from a broad perspective, like when I look at the game plan, I think that is my explanation. That's the best I can do. I'm sure we'll talk to Jeff Grimes about it on Tuesday, but here sitting at, whatever time on Sunday night, that's kind of my read on it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's so easy to sit in a chair while the game's going on and say, why are they calling this versus why are they calling that? And there's multiple answers to that question. And, and I'm not saying Grimes is perfect. You heard me say earlier in the episode, I thought that at some point they should have pivoted and should have basically lined up and said, hey, Kevin, use the ball 25 times and and gone with that. I also think you go into a game with certain expectations for how you're going to attack certain things. That's what you practiced all
Mhm.
week. Those are the things that you've drilled on it. And I'm not saying that you can't adjust, but what I am saying is there's a feeling out period. Then, like you're saying, a lot of times the opponent will show you something a little bit different than what they had shown in the first game, especially when your first game's against Eastern Illinois. And so you look at it and you say, well, here's our adjustment to their adjustment. But if for whatever reason, especially like you said, if your quarterback isn't playing well, things that
Yeah.
seem like easy money that feel like, okay, if they're going to show this, we're going to hit them with that, and that's going to be all she wrote.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. I also think too, we maybe don't give enough credit to Illinois, and I realize Illinois didn't play, super well offensively or whatever else. Illinois, I thought, was better at defensive back spots
Yeah.
than they were a year ago. I felt like last year Kansas was kind of running free all over the place, and it wasn't like that this year. The spaces were smaller. Guys were more attached in coverage and all of those things, and I think that matters too.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're right. And this, I'm talking to Jeremy, right? And for our podcast midweek, he mentioned that those guys are a year older now. They've had a year of experience because this time last year, they just lost guys to the NFL draft,
Yeah, a
legit
bunch of
guys and
yeah,
at defensive back. And they were having new guys being brought in. And now those guys are second year starters. Now, I'll also say this. You mentioned West Virginia 2022. Well, KU had a full offseason to prep for that, right? We didn't see any
full
of
on.
that
Yeah,
against Tennessee Tech. Yes,
yeah,
Tennessee Tech was that year. And then all of a sudden, KU comes out with that, and you're like, what the heck? Well, what do you think Illinois spent all offseason looking at? How the
yeah,
heck can we create some confusion for KU?
yeah,
Like Bielema talked about it, Lance talked about it. Like KU clowned them last year. And Aaron Henry talked about it, the defensive coordinator for Illinois. He watched the game 100 times. You know, nobody likes being clowned, right? These coaches have pride. And so what are you going to do all offseason? You're going to go and work your butt off to try and make sure that when you play that team again, you show them what you're made of. And that's what Illinois did. And I'm sure they spent a lot of time in their camp working on some of these wrinkles, not only for Kansas, right? This isn't saying like this was Illinois' Super Bowl, but so maybe this year they've got more wrinkles to throw at teams,
yeah,
and Kansas is the team that maybe asked questions of your defense in the scheme you were using last year. And now you think, okay, these are the tweaks we can do to have more success this year. And so, like Leipold said, Illinois is a program with a lot of pride. They don't like the way last year panned out. You can see that in the player quotes from Illinois this week. You can see from the coach quotes this week.
yeah.
This is a big game for them. And they came out and played like it and ran out some new stuff, which you'd expect in a game that means a lot to a team. So I think those are kind of my final thoughts. I don't know.
That is one of my favorite moments of the Leipold tenure, though, and the West Virginia DC gets asked about that, after the game, and he's just like, "Look, like we didn't see any of that. How do you
Mhm.
expect us to come out and defend, an option offense when you spent all offseason not preparing to face the option, and then all of a sudden somebody turns into a military academy basically, and
Right?
showing you all these different looks, like you didn't prepare for that at all. And obviously this wasn't to that extent, but I do think, to your point, and it's a great point, I think Illinois is more versatile this year. I mean, they've got more experience on the back end. I think, Gabe Akis plays both that outside linebacker spot and he slides up to the defensive line. So they can do some different things there. Whereas I thought last year they were kind of very regimented in what they did, because guys, before you can be versatile, you got to learn one spot before you can learn two. And
Exactly.
so I think that, Illinois' defense probably does deserve some credit in the way that they played Kansas. I still think, was it a game that Kansas should have won? Yes. It's one of those. I remember, you remember when Kansas lost to Michigan in the NCAA tournament with Trey
Yes.
Burke? Um, at the time, Jesse Newell, who's now at the Kansas City Star, wrote an article for the Journal World, which is where he's at the time, and everybody hated it because it was like 6 months, or it was a while after the game, and he basically said, "Hey, by the way, in order for Kansas to lose that game, these like 8 things all had to go wrong. If just one of them went KU's way, they win that game."
Mm.
This felt a little bit like that, right? Like it felt like, hey, if you don't make this mistake, if you don't throw this interception, if you don't, the defense was so good, Swain. There was a period in the fourth quarter. They only gave up 6 third down conversions the whole game. They gave up 4 of them in a row in the stretch in the fourth quarter. And I'm not blaming the defense. I'm just saying
No.
if you make one of those plays, if you don't drop the ball when you have a reverse totally set up, if Jared Casey makes his block. All of these different things, if one of those things goes a little bit differently, then maybe we're having a very different conversation right now than we are.
Exactly. Well, and to Kevin, I looked at this. I'm pulling up the stats right here. So I think it was 11 minutes for the defense on the field in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what you expect,
Yeah.
right? They're going to wear down at some point. You can't go play 15 straight minutes of football. And KU went interception, 3 and out, 3 and out.
Yep.
Like, that's not a lot of time for the defense to rest. And that's something, right, with the complementary football aspect that you really need to. You got to help out your defense. And KU's offense just couldn't keep hold of the ball, and that's how something like that happens, right? Your defense just is so good for so much of the game, and then it runs out of gas because you can't withstand that type of physical level for so long. And you just saw the drop off. And KU tried to rotate late in the game, right? Like Alex Wright came in. I think Javier Derrick came in for a minute just to try and spell some of those guys, and they just couldn't. And so you got to play complementary football, right? And that's for KU. Like, KU's still at the point. It has talented players, but it does not have the overwhelming talent where you can go turn the ball over 3 times, have 3 and outs, and expect your team to still perform at a high level.
Yeah. They're going to have a lot to clean up. I don't want to say that Lance Leipold wanted this, because obviously they want to win and keep winning. But I do think that he's somebody that enjoys the coaching aspect of it, in terms of being able to sit down with your guys and say, hey, this is where we can clean things up. This is where we can get better. And Kansas still has a chance to be a really good football team this year, especially if Jalon bounces back from this and winds up being kind of more what we're used to seeing. This is going to be a really big week, because I think, one, it's going to challenge the defense more, because UNLV is really good on offense. But I think the flip side of that is if UNLV winds up scoring quite a bit, can Kansas keep pace? Is the offense going to rebound to the extent that they can make those plays? And I do think UNLV, another team that Kansas kind of embarrassed on defense a year ago in that bowl game, and they went out and landed about 35 SEC defensive backs, it felt like, in the portal. And so they're hoping that can solve at least one or two of those questions. And so that's going to be kind of a fascinating game at Children's Mercy Park this week.
That it is. All right, Kevin, I think that's what we got for this game. Plenty of thoughts next week on UNLV, maybe potentially different type of vibe for a podcast. I think KU fans, I hope for a much different vibe for a podcast. But Kevin, thanks as always for joining us on a Sunday. And thanks as always for listening to the Fog.net podcast. You're watching this on YouTube. Make sure you're giving us those likes and you're subscribing to the channel. You click the bell so whenever we upload something, right, you see it in your email. And always drop a comment as well. Help us with the old algorithm. If you are listening on your preferred podcast platform of choice, make sure you leave us ratings and reviews. Those always go a long way as well, helping us reach new Kansas fans. Kevin, thank you for your time. Always appreciate it. We'll be back most likely with the midweek episode. Got to find someone from UNLV to talk to. That'll be an exciting time. Thanks as always for listening. We'll talk to you all this week.